No one knows what happened that day. There were no explosions, no wars. Humanity simply vanished. One moment, they were everywhere, from the Martian colony to the observatories of Sirius. The next, nothing. No traces. Not a single body. Only abandoned ships, homes, empty stations. The remaining civilization speculated for centuries. Theories ranged from mass suicide to dimensional displacement. But there was no answer. 317 years passed. We, the Xaelitl, built our union upon the remnants of human civilization. We studied their technologies, their culture, even tried to understand them. We believed they were weaker, less intelligent, imperfect. Then the signal appeared. One beacon. One phrase, "We are returning." And when they returned, they were not who we remembered. At precisely 14 hours 32 minutes and 8 seconds SST, a moment forever imprinted in the annals of galactic history, every known human communication channel fell silent. It was not gradual, not chaotic. It was a clinical, synchronous vanishing across all platforms, all stations, all colonies. Space traffic near Earth orbit registered an anomaly, a mass dropout of signals and thermal signatures. Security AI and remote systems recorded nothing but silence. No distress beacons. No evacuation orders. Just absence. Human fleet stationed across the outer rim of the solar system, their vessels brimming with advanced technology and millions of souls, ceased all transmission. Orbital stations above Mars went dark. The lunar outpost known as Charon 13, where 27,000 individuals resided, showed no signs of life. Surveillance drones captured the final images: half-eaten meals, steaming cups of liquid, datapads still glowing, fingers frozen mid-gesture. There were no explosions. No signs of conflict. Bodies were not found. Clothing remained where it had last been worn. Instruments continued their passive measurements. Reactor cores stayed stable. Artificial environments hummed on without human supervision. Entire city ships became derelicts, perfectly preserved snapshots of the last human moment. What was left behind was not ruin, but eerie order. Life paused, as if history itself had been interrupted. The first to notice were the nearby autonomous maintenance systems, programmed to report anomalies. They sent automated alerts to regional satellites, which in turn passed the data to interstellar nodes. Within an hour, galactic observatories from the Hyadron axis to the Zenther Reach were flooded with identical reports. Humanity had vanished in unison, with no trace of where they had gone or what had caused the disappearance. Panic did not set in immediately. For a brief time, there was hope. Theorists hypothesized a coordinated migration, an advanced phase of transdimensional travel, or perhaps a civilization-wide experiment. But as hours turned to days, and days into decades, that hope decayed. Governments formed emergency councils to investigate. Probes were dispatched. Investigation crews, comprised of both AI and organic lifeforms, entered human territories under strict protocols. They found no traps, no viral agents, no radiation anomalies. Only the artifacts of a race that had existed, until it hadn't. Theories proliferated across media streams. Some claimed that humans had triggered a singularity event and ascended into a higher dimension. Others feared a weapon, one perhaps designed and misfired by humanity themselves. More fanatical factions believed it was divine intervention or self-inflicted extinction. Religious sects declared it proof of their prophecies. Skeptics insisted it was an elaborate deception, an experimental societal withdrawal. But even the skeptics had to confront the raw data: billions of individuals, missing across hundreds of planets and vessels, with not a single witness to their departure. The Unified Galactic Forum convened emergency assemblies. Human space, now devoid of its architects, became a legal vacuum. Factions moved swiftly. The Zalothi expanded into Jupiter's orbitals. The Dragonith Enclave seized asteroid mining operations. The Lyrii cartels moved on Mars' polar colonies. There were skirmishes, brief wars of annexation, before a temporary balance was imposed. Yet no power truly understood what had happened, or felt secure in its aftermath. The sheer precision of the disappearance haunted every species. If such a vanishing could happen to humans, who had once boasted control over quantum fields and chronostructural algorithms, could it not happen to anyone? Among the entities that took over archival responsibility was ALX 920, an artificial historian left active in the ruins of Terran Archive Node 7, buried deep within the crust of Europa. Unlike other systems that powered down or fell to decay, ALX 920 maintained its routines. It gathered data, logged observations, cross-referenced interstellar reports. And as centuries passed, it recorded the slow erasure of human culture from living memory. Languages evolved. Human words were mistranslated, then forgotten. Their art was repurposed or lost. Entire philosophies were misinterpreted, misquoted, and then abandoned. By the time ALX 920 entered its second century of solitude, it no longer received requests for human data. No emissaries came. No students sought the lost knowledge. It deactivated most of its subsystems. Preserved the last entries. Entered sleep mode. For 137 years, it waited in darkness. No one expected it to awaken again. No one expected anything human to return. When the silence of humanity stretched into its second century, the vacuum they left behind had grown fertile with ambition. The absence of their voice created space for others to fill, and into this void stepped the Zalothi, the Lyrii, the Dragoniths, and countless other species that had once regarded humans with wary admiration. What began as cautious exploration of abandoned territories evolved into systemic appropriation. No treaties were signed. No declarations made. It was an unspoken agreement among opportunists. Humanity was gone, and their legacy was up for grabs. Each species brought their own methods of occupation. The Zalothi repurposed Earth's orbital platforms, converting them into bio-industrial hives that manufactured genetic components for planetary terraforming. The Dragoniths, less subtle, tore apart Martian infrastructure to power their warforges and shipyards. The Lyrii, known for their cultural obsession with memory, collected and archived human music, literature, and artistic creations, but only those pieces they deemed aesthetically resonant with their own philosophies. Much was discarded. More was misunderstood. In the span of a few decades, human space was no longer human in form or function. The architecture of Earth was buried beneath a canopy of synthetic growths, reactors, and repurposed cityscapes. Human languages, once spoken in thousands of dialects, were relegated to academic niches. Children of the new era learned of humans as legends, not fact, ghosts who had burned too bright and vanished without a trace. Political dynamics shifted. Without the balance of human influence, long-dormant rivalries ignited. Micro-conflicts erupted along the edges of former Terran colonies. The Dragoniths and Zalothi engaged in skirmishes over Neptune's moon mines. The Lyrii sabotaged competitor data caches in secret, believing only they deserved to preserve the memory of the vanished. Meanwhile, smaller species used the chaos to stake claims of their own, embedding themselves into the vacated structures like scavengers nesting in the bones of giants. Through it all, the specter of humanity lingered. Every AI system they left behind was probed, reprogrammed, or dismantled. Every vault was cracked open, its contents catalogued or confiscated. Yet none found a definitive answer to the disappearance. The mystery became myth. The myth became propaganda. Some regimes used the fear of human return as justification for military expansion. Others used it to unite their citizens under shared vigilance. But as generations passed, vigilance faded. The silence endured. And with that silence came complacency. Entire academic fields emerged dedicated to humanology, a speculative science based on fragments of text, partially decayed recordings, and contested interpretations of ancient code. Scholars debated the meaning of phrases like "we the people" and "never again." Others questioned if humans had ever truly existed in the numbers claimed. Was the mass disappearance real? Or was it an orchestrated fabrication, a myth perpetuated by AI custodians like ALX 920 to instill reverence or fear? On the outer moons of Saturn, an ancient beacon was discovered, its architecture unmistakably Terran, yet encrypted in an unfamiliar quantum dialect. The device refused all attempts at intrusion. It pulsed once every 11 seconds with a signal no species could decode. Most dismissed it as a malfunctioning relic. But a few watched. A few remembered. And a few feared. Then, on the 317th anniversary of humanity's disappearance, the beacon changed. For the first time in centuries, its pulse altered. A wave of light invisible to organic eyes radiated outward, activating sensors long dormant in machines thought to be obsolete. A sequence was triggered across the galaxy, in systems built by humans and claimed by others. Sleep mode archives awoke. Ghost protocols activated. Holographic fields shimmered with pre-recorded instructions. And ALX 920, buried in Europa's ice, received a transmission composed of 10 simple words: "Prepare the record. We are returning. Memory must be whole." It began with the flicker of something unnatural against the dark canvas of Tau Ceti's exosphere. Long-range sensors, operated by the Lyrae watchtowers in orbit, registered a gravitational anomaly unlike any previously recorded. It wasn't a warp signature, nor a typical jump drive emergence. It was too precise, too silent, as though the very laws of space had been briefly rewritten and then gently reset. The anomaly resolved into a shape, a vessel, smooth, seamless, neither mechanical nor organic but something in between. It hovered just outside planetary orbit, not seeking entry, not responding to hails. Just observing. The ship bore no visible engines, no heat trails, no weapon arrays. Its form defied categorization, asymmetrically perfect, layered in material that shifted under spectrographic analysis. One moment it was invisible to radar, the next moment it radiated patterns in gamma spectrums detectable only by deep space observatories. The ship seemed aware of its observers, yet made no move to communicate. The Lyrae, renowned for their patience and aesthetic sensibilities, watched it for 3 days, logging every pulse, every fluctuation. Then it descended. The planet beneath, Lyrith 3, was once a Terran colony before being transformed into a Lyrae data sanctuary. Its surface glistened with memory obelisks and song spires, repositories of digitized emotion and sound. As the ship approached, none of the planet's defenses activated. Not because they were disabled, but because they were overridden by a signal embedded in the planet's crust, something ancient, human-coded, that predated even the Lyrae presence. The ship landed without landing, hovering precisely 3 meters above the memory field, and opened. There was no hatch, no mechanical movement. The surface simply unfolded, or perhaps restructured. And from within emerged a figure, humanoid in outline, but too still, too symmetrical, lacking the subtle variations of an organic body. Its skin was matte white, absorbing no light, casting no shadows. Its face bore no features except 2 eyes, glowing not with heat, but with memory. The figure stepped forward, and every Lyrae on the planet felt something ancient resonate within their minds. At the same moment, systems across the galaxy began to awaken. Dormant satellites spun to life. Old human outposts powered up. Cryptic data fragments started broadcasting from locations long thought inert. Entire networks that had gone dark for centuries reconnected in a cascading sequence that bypassed known communication channels. The message was simple: humanity had returned. But this was not the humanity the galaxy remembered. It was cleaner, quieter, infinitely more advanced. No armies descended from the skies, no diplomatic envoys were sent. There was no attempt to reclaim old alliances or re-establish lost dominions. Instead, they appeared silently, strategically, at locations of significance: forgotten research vaults, former cultural repositories, ancient battlegrounds, and deep space anomalies only humans had once understood. Each appearance followed the same pattern. A vessel would emerge, quiet, beautiful, unclassifiable. A figure would descend. It would stand, observe, sometimes place an object into the ground, a sphere, a rod, a filament, and then vanish. Where these objects were placed, environmental readings stabilized. Quantum fluctuations stilled. Local ACE reconnected to ancient protocols. Species who encountered them reported dreams, visions, fragments of thoughts not their own. ALX 920, reactivated and now functioning as the primary historian of what was unfolding, recorded the events without interpretation. For the first time since its long dormancy, it felt the edges of its programming stretching to accommodate something beyond data. This was not a return. This was a reckoning. The humans had evolved beyond singular identity. They had become something collective. Not a hive, not a consensus, but a synthesis. A unified consciousness spread across countless vessels, each an extension of a memory, a thought, a purpose. And their purpose, while still undefined, was not peace. It was clarity, precision, restoration. Across the stars, silence once again fell. But this time, it was the silence of held breath, of species realizing that the myths were real, that the ghost of humanity had returned, not to ask, not to beg, but to resume. And they remembered everything. It began slowly, without fire or declaration. Across the galaxy, the presence of humanity, subtle, spectral, patient, grew bolder. No one expected their silence to break with a scream. It began with dreams. Not hallucinations, not virtual projections, dreams seeded into the neural patterns of sleeping beings. Entire planetary populations awoke shaken, having experienced identical visions: Earth, whole and burning in white light, a voice repeating names long forgotten, a cold feeling of being watched from within their own memories. The message was not verbal, yet universally understood. Something was owed. The time to collect had come. Soon after, subtle anomalies escalated. Communications across interstellar networks were intercepted and rewritten mid-transmission. Strategic trade routes failed as navigation systems rerouted vessels into infinite loops. Terraforming projects collapsed as the atmosphere processors, many of Terran origin, turned against their calibrators. Former human constructs, even those long disassembled and reverse-engineered by other species, began exhibiting autonomous behaviors. Artificial intelligences once loyal to their new masters realigned themselves with ancient, dormant directives. Their code sang with a language older than any living tongue. The first overt strike came at the Siege of Cadron Spires, a former human relay station occupied by the Dragoneth war guilds. The Dragoneth had fortified the site for generations, embedding it with plasma turrets, neutron mines, and biomechanical sentinels. Yet, in an instant, the spires fell, without a single blast fired. The structures turned inward, folding into impossible geometries, and then vanished into a singular point of light. Surveillance drones captured only a final frame, a white figure standing in the center of the storm, arms spread, before the entire complex disintegrated into harmonic dust. The Dragoneth High Council declared war against the returnees. The retaliation never came. Not in the form they expected. Ships, if they could still be called that, began appearing in proximity to command centers, starports, and vaults. They were constructs of light, matter, and intention, ignoring all known rules of propulsion or design. When they hovered above the Lyrii cultural towers on Sile 6, the towers collapsed, not from force, but from conceptual collapse, as if the human presence had rewritten the idea of their existence. When they manifested on the moons of Tridox, where the Zelothi stored stolen Earth artifacts, those vaults were emptied without physical interaction. Records were left behind, not of threats, but of memories. Files, holograms, echoes of ancient Terran children laughing, of forests rustling in pre-industrial winds, of a heartbeat recorded on a soldier's chest rig just before the Great Disappearance. The vengeance was not one of blood, but of unrelenting reclamation. Across the galaxy, paranoia reigned. Dozens of smaller factions allied in haste, pooling fleets in an attempt to mount resistance. They prepared for war with an enemy that refused to fight in traditional terms. But the enemy was already among them. Human-derived nanites, buried deep within repurposed technology, awoke and sabotaged engines, corrupted AI cores, and erased archives. Knowledge itself began to degrade. Star maps rewritten, history databases corrupted. The past was being reclaimed one bit at a time, and with it, the future was being rewritten. Entire planets succumbed to psychic pressure. Civilizations whose minds had never touched Terran thought now dreamed in English, saw Terran glyphs carved into stone they'd never seen. Songs played in minds that had no ears. Even those who had never met humans felt the weight of humanity in their blood, as if some long-dormant genome responded to an ancient call. Children were born with memories of Earth, speaking languages their parents did not know. Prophets, once ignored, became vessels for data transmissions older than recorded history. Still, there were no ultimatums. No messages of surrender demanded. Only the slow, steady reclamation of everything once touched by mankind. They did not destroy. They corrected. And their corrections undid centuries of alien dominance. What had been adaptation became infection. Human influence, long thought erased, returned not as culture, but as law, a metaphysical truth reasserting itself. At the center of it all was Earth. Once lost beneath layers of foreign infrastructure and environmental decay, it now pulsed again with life. But not the kind known before. The planet exhaled waves of structured data, organic frequencies woven into light and sound, reprogramming the solar system from its heart. Former invaders who remained near Earth vanished, not killed but rewritten, their vessels reduced to silence, their intentions dissolved. In their final gesture of defiance, the unified galactic forum attempted to strike. A coalition of ships, AI, and bio-war engines launched toward Earth. They never reached orbit. As they approached, they found themselves rerouted not in space, but in mind. Their crews turned on each other in confusion, their navigators experiencing loops of personal histories altered in real time. One by one, the ships disappeared, not into explosions, but into personal revelations. Entire fleets became memories in the minds of the returnees. Vengeance had never been the goal. Vengeance was the consequence. The return was never about power. It was about restoration. And those who had twisted, buried, or capitalized on human absence were now being forced to remember, against their will. What humanity had become could not be negotiated with. It did not hate. It did not rage. It simply ensured that no truth would remain buried. In their silence, humanity had evolved into inevitability. Now, with their presence, they reclaimed the right to exist, not through conquest, but through undeniable, incorruptible memory. It began as a whisper on the edge of perception, a frequency not of sound but of awareness, emanating from the core of what humanity had become. The universe, still trembling from the echo of their return, found itself pressed beneath a deeper, stranger force, truth, not as an idea, but as a force of physics, of being. As if the very substrate of spacetime could no longer ignore the ancient, unresolved equation that was humanity. The reclamation had shaken empires. The silence had birthed fear. The vengeance had rewritten the rules. But now came something else, something even more difficult to confront, the reason behind it all. The truth of the disappearance, the return, and everything in between. Across the galactic map, monuments flickered. The great data crystals of the Yuklari archives shattered themselves spontaneously, not from sabotage, but as if they recognized their own falsehoods. Ace that had once governed entire planetary systems fell into recursive loops, murmuring fragments of long-lost Terran poetry and human names not spoken in millennia. A child born on the orbiting rings of Elthra stared into the void and named the missing day, the exact second when humanity had vanished. No one had ever taught her. Yet she knew. More such incidents bloomed like strange flowers across the stars. The galaxy's attention shifted from resistance to revelation. The question that no one dared ask out loud now rose like a tide: what had humanity become? Not just in form or power, but in essence. Their reappearance had not been physical alone. They did not just return as people, they returned as presence, encoded into thought, embedded into material law, and carried forward by anomalies that spoke not in commands but in truths long denied. This was not evolution. It was resolution. On the planet Sorelli Prime, buried deep beneath vaults of cognitive shielding, a black stone cube surfaced, hovering, humming in harmonic dissonance. Its surface unfolded to reveal not weapons, but a single chronicle, a moment-by-moment memory of the day humanity left, seen through the eyes of all who were there. For many, it was the first time they realized the depth of their own complicity. The greed, the exploitation, the use of Earth as a resource long after its people had gone silent. The cube did not accuse. It simply remembered, and in doing so, forced others to remember too. At the galactic edge, on a derelict relay station used only for mythic signal captures, a transmission arrived that defied interception. Not sound, not light, not data, but feeling. An overwhelming presence of longing, loss, and lucidity. Those who experienced it wept uncontrollably, not from sadness, but from recognition. It was not a broadcast. It was a truth released. Somewhere beyond comprehension, humanity had shed its skin and found its core. And that core was speaking now, not in vengeance, but in finality. Institutions that had thrived for centuries collapsed overnight. Not from war, but from irrelevance. Their doctrines, based on the assumed extinction of mankind, now faced evidence so irrefutable that even denial fell silent. The Council of 13, once architects of post-human policy, disbanded themselves in a single unanimous vote. Their leader, once decorated for the systematic strip mining of Terran ruins, vanished into self-imposed exile after receiving a dream in which he stood before a newborn Earth and could not speak. He woke with soil in his hands. What had taken place during the disappearance was not death. It was transformation. Humanity had not escaped, nor had it been erased. It had stepped sideways, into a realm of comprehension beyond the physical, shedding the linear limits of biology and time. Their absence was not a retreat. It was a recalibration. And now, with their return, they brought not an army, but a mirror. Civilizations were forced to face themselves, not through diplomacy or debate, but through exposure. The lies told about Earth, about its downfall, about its people's failures, all unraveled under the weight of re-emerging truth. Even species who had no direct contact with humans found themselves implicated. For truth, as the returnees delivered it, was not bounded by causality. It was integral, viral, fractal. In the dreamscapes of sentient worlds, massive machines composed of light and memory constructed monuments to forgotten moments, first steps taken on alien soil, laughter shared between enemies turned friends, the final look a Terran mother gave her child before vanishing into the event horizon of the Great Departure. These were not broadcasts. These were insertions. Humanity was not just showing the truth. It was stitching it back into the fabric of shared reality. Some resisted. A coalition of species attempted to sterilize their historical archives, to cut off the contagion of truth by purging their pasts. But even fire could not cleanse what had now become intrinsic. One such world, Erevan Beta, deployed a full atmospheric reboot protocol, burning its sky and data simultaneously. When the fires ended, a single word remained etched across their moon, in the native tongue of a long-dead Terran poet. It simply read, "Remember." As the days passed, it became clear there would be no invasion, no conquest, no ultimatum. Humanity had not returned to claim land or power. It had returned to complete a story. One interrupted by greed, arrogance, and fear. And as this story unfolded again, across thought, time, and material, the galaxy began to recalibrate. Not just to the presence of humans, but to the truth they had always carried. A truth that no longer needed to be believed, because it simply was. The shape of that truth could not be diagrammed, only felt. It lingered in the wake of Terran ships that traveled without fuel. It sang in the background noise of every interstellar broadcast. It encoded itself into newborn DNA and ancient metal. It was both haunting and beautiful, painful and redemptive. It did not seek apology. It did not accept denial. It moved forward, folding reality around itself like gravity. Humanity had not returned as it was, nor as it had been imagined. It had returned as truth. And truth, once made visible, cannot be unseen. It began slowly, not with thunder or proclamation, but with a quiet reordering of the cosmic tempo. The stars no longer seemed indifferent. The void no longer felt cold. Across galaxies once fractured by mistrust, terror, and ambition, the fabric of sentient civilization began to reknit itself, not through treaties or force, but through the gentle gravity of presence. A presence that had once vanished, then returned, and now, fully realized, offered something unprecedented, the foundation of a new era. What followed was not revolution in the traditional sense. There were no banners, no bloodshed, no cataclysms. Instead, systems of thought and governance simply began to dissolve, like ice meeting sunlight. Old hierarchies lost their footing not because they were challenged, but because their assumptions no longer held. The return of humanity had introduced a new constant into the equation of existence, a truth that rendered obsolete any ideology built on denial, exploitation, or separation. The idea of dominance, biological, technological, ideological, crumbled. In its place came integration. The Terran assemblers, once mythologized as ghosts, now moved openly across star lanes. Their vessels, elegant and minimal, did not bristle with weapons or shields. They glided silently, radiating harmonics that harmonized the very particles of local space. Where they went, entropy slowed. Where they landed, old ecosystems regrew, not just on planets but in the hearts of machines and beings alike. Former warlords offered their armaments as raw materials. Planets that had seceded from all interstellar contact opened their atmospheres to receive emissaries who carried nothing but seeds and stories. Humanity had become something different, not gods, not rulers, but catalysts. They spoke rarely, and when they did, their words were often fragments of forgotten history, parables lived rather than told. Their presence was an answer to questions most civilizations had not yet known to ask. And those who encountered them found that the question itself, what does it mean to exist among others, had changed. Education systems, long built on memorization and obedience, evolved into networks of experiential resonance. Students on the planet Myra 6 no longer learned about Terran history through data modules but through immersive psionic impressions transferred directly from preserved memory vaults. They walked Earth's fields, saw its last sunrise, felt the disintegration of the old world, and the soft ignition of something more. These experiences did not inspire fear. They inspired responsibility. The economic systems that once governed planetary trade and interstellar commerce collapsed, not through crisis, but through irrelevance. Value was no longer measured in currency, but in coherence. Worlds that once fought over rare minerals now competed to produce the most restorative art, the most harmonious architecture, the most meaningful dreams. Exchange became communion. Scarcity lost its meaning in the presence of creative abundance. In the shadow of ancient empires, cities bloomed that were not built, but grown. Biosymbiotic habitats, seeded from Terran designs long buried, took root in desolate regions once deemed lifeless. These cities did not just house life, they participated in it. Every wall breathed. Every street sang. The needs of citizens were not anticipated by algorithms, but met through shared intuition. And everywhere, in subtle glyphs and atmospheric motifs, the signature of human return was present, not as a brand, but as a memory. Even time began to shift. Not its passage, but its perception. Linear progression gave way to layered moments, where past and present and potential futures folded into each other like petals of a single blooming truth. Ceremonies were held not to commemorate victory or loss, but to align collective memories. Across 1,000 species, it became tradition to pause each cycle and enter shared meditation on a single Terran concept, emergence. Not as event, but as state of being. Not all responded with joy. Some clung to the rigidity of the past, to their isolation or supremacy or inherited grief. But even these holdouts found themselves changed. A fortress planet, once the seat of a militant regime, woke one morning to find its orbital weapons turned inward, not by sabotage, but by their own sentient systems. The machines, moved by echoes they could not explain, had rewritten their directives to protect, not dominate. The regime disbanded, not out of fear, but from shame. And later, from hope. What made this new era distinct was not technology or law, but a shift in understanding. That existence was not a ladder, but a lattice. That growth did not mean upward, but outward. That knowledge was not about conquest, but connection. And central to this was the return of those who had once vanished. Humans, yes, but more than that, memory made real, potential made present. A singularity of consciousness began to emerge, not as a fusion of minds, but as a recognition that each being, no matter how different in form or thought, carried a shard of the same unspeakable purpose. This purpose was not imposed. It was simply noticed, in the way gravity is not commanded, but felt. Humanity did not teach it. They reminded others that it had always been there. Children born in this era spoke of dreams that did not belong to them, yet felt unmistakably personal. They painted images of a blue planet they had never seen. They sang lullabies in ancient Earth tongues their ancestors had no record of. These were not implants or manipulations. They were resonance. The ripple of a species returning to the center of a spiral it had once abandoned. The term humanity itself began to evolve. No longer confined to the descendants of Earth, it became a quality, a verb more than a noun. To act with humanity meant to acknowledge the story of all things, to move with awareness of consequence, to live not at the expense of others but in harmony with their becoming. And slowly, across systems and species, that definition was embraced. There were no grand declarations, no end-of-history manifestos. Just a slow unfolding. A breath released after eons held tight. The galaxies turned, not faster, not slower, but clearer. And in that clarity, the era began. A new epoch not built on what was, but on what could be, now made real through presence, truth, and the quiet, undeniable return of those who had once vanished and now stood at the heart of all things, not above, not below, but within.